Hey guys, this is Jan for Chess24. It's time to revisit the European Club Cup, which is being held in Skopje, Macedonia. In round number 5 we had a big matchup, both teams-wise and individually, on the top board, where the Russian team from Siberia faced the Azeri squad Sokar. Siberia represented by Vladmir Kramnik on the top board, and on Sokar's side he faced none other than his old rival Veselin Topalov, one of the biggest grudge matches we have in chess. Both sides not really on good terms ever since their infamous match in 2006, labeled Toiletgate for the World Championships. These players haven't been shaking hands, and there's been a lot of bloodshed whenever they played each other. Not literally, just to be clear, but a lot of victories. Normally whoever had the white pieces was getting the better of his opponent. And this time around it is Vladmir Kramnik with the white pieces, so let's see if that trend continues. d4, knight f6. d4, by the way, small surprise by Kramnik, because recently he's been going a lot of one knight f3 followed by g3 against pretty much anybody and anything. So to see him return to d4 is a minor surprise, but he's played it throughout his career, so not a huge sensation either. Knight f6, knight to f3, and Topalov goes e6. Plays a lot of Queen's Gambit, so he could have started with d5 here. By e6 he indicates that against c4 he probably was planning to play the Queen's Indian with b6, or maybe the Bogo Indian with bishop b4, because if he wanted the Queen's Gambit he could have played d5 on move number 2. Kramnik not in the mood for either of those systems, and he plays a move e3, move that is not that often seen at top level. Of course it's a perfectly healthy move. Why wants to go bishop d3 in short castles, and only then determine his pawn structure. But still a surprise, because yeah, you don't see this very much from the big guys. Black has a bunch of viable setups. Topalov goes for the main line c5, bishop d3, and now the move b6. Black can also play in the center. Levan Aronian recently played knight c6, castles, and d5 against Vladmir Kramnik, which is also, of course, very playable. b6 in Queen's Indian style is arguably the main line, though. Castles, bishop b7, c4, the only critical move to bring the knight to the center to c3 and battle for these central squares. C takes d4, once again not forced. I think I've dabbled with moves like g6 here, but cd4 is the main line. ed, bishop to e7, knight comes out to c3. Now black has to be a bit careful about white pawn pushes in the center. For example, if he castled here, d5 is already a little unpleasant, so you don't really want to allow that, and that's why Topalov goes for the move d5 here, fighting back in the center immediately and intending to inflict white with an isolated pawn on d4. Kramnik keeps following the mainline theory, c takes d5, knight takes d5, and the move knight e5. Tending to give a check if he gets the chance, and also to clear the way for his queen towards h5 or g4. Short castles and queen to g4. Queen h5 has also been seen, but queen g4 is the main line. When black faces a bit of a choice, you don't want to tolerate this queen on g4 with bishop h6 threatened and everything, so you should kick it away. The main move here is the move knight to f6. This is not played by Topalov in this game. Queen to h4, and there's already some ideas in the air, like bishop g5, bishop f6, and queen h7 checkmate. Black has to be very careful. For example, one of my favorite tricks here is knight to c6, bishop g5, threatening bishop f6. Black plays the logical g6, and it looks like everything's defended, but white wins in one move here with the very pretty bishop to a6, overstretching black's defenses. And check it out yourself, there's no defense at all. Black loses material and can resign here. Trick that's worth keeping in mind, many strong players have fallen for this, Judith Polgar amongst others. And Topalov doesn't, but he does avoid the line with knight f6. Instead of knight to c6, which I just showed, better bet for black here, and the main line of theory, at least as far as I know, is the move knight to e4, blocking this bishop and attacking the queen. Queen to h3, and queen takes d4. Black wins a pawn, and white probably, or I don't know, but the main line is bishop f4, continuing in sacrificial style. when white has compensation for the pawn, something like knight f6, knight e2, queen to a4. The last time I checked, black was doing quite alright here, so would have been interesting to see what Kramnik had in mind against that. End of little theory X course, knight f6. The main move wasn't played by Topalov. Instead he went for the move f5, which has pros and cons. The pros is it kicks away the queen from g4 and it blocks this bishop's diagonal. The cons are also pretty obvious. You weaken the e6 pawn and the e5 square. So the white queen retreats to e2, keeping an eye on both of these. Bishop f6 has to be played to clear the connection from the rook to e8 to the e6 pawn in order to defend it. Bishop to c4. This bishop says, my job is done on this diagonal. I've provoked f5. I'll switch to this one and keep an eye on the e6 pawn and the d5 knight. Rook to e8, also very, very logical, protecting the e6 pawn before anything bad happens. White keeps developing as well with rook to d1, and now black faces a choice. Turns out his position isn't all that pleasant. The most natural move to my mind would be knight to c6, but that runs into a little trick. White can go knight takes d5, e takes d5. It looks like black is fine, this is attacked, but it turns out white can ignore the attack on the c4 bishop and play the move f4, just quietly, calmly bolstering his knight on e5, and black can't really take on c4 because of the queen c4. It's either checkmate on f7 or checkmate shortly after with knight f7, at the very least picking up the queen. Let me show it just for good luck. You don't even need the queen, you can go for the famous smothered mate. Nothing we're gonna see happen at 2800 level, but that explains why Topalov avoids the move knight to c6 and instead he goes for knight to d7. Another move, and maybe the best move, I'm not sure, is the move a6 here, just to overprotect or to protect this b5 square, because knight d7 is played, ran into the annoying bishop b5. This bishop once again switches diagonals, finds new work, pinning this knight, forcing black to go bishop takes e5, parting with the precious two bishops. Bishop e5, d e5. Now the structure has changed. The e6 pawn is no longer vulnerable, but white got rid of his isolated pawn and he got a hold of the two bishops. So it is fair to say that Kramnik did win the theory battle. Queen e7, knight takes d5, bishop takes d5. Here I was expecting a quiet move like bishop d2 to put it here, or maybe b3, bishop b2. But Kramnik plays more ambitiously. He goes for the move queen to h5, which does carry a pretty nasty threat. You want to go bishop g5, which would win material, so black has to do something about it. Topalov goes g6, which stops the threat, but also weakens his dark squares on the king side quite permanently. So I'm not sure this was the right decision. The black position is already unpleasant, but a better bet maybe was the move h6, stopping bishop g5. I would guess he didn't go for this because of queen g6, threatening some unpleasantness with bishop takes h6. But this position strikes me as not as bad. For example, rook c8 or rook d8, bishop takes h6, knight takes e5, queen to g3 and knight to g4. Well, white does have the two bishops and is arguably a bit better. Black has active pieces and shouldn't be in too horrible shape. Of course, his line wasn't forced as other moves than queen g6. But in general, this g6 move I am not sure about because it does leave these long-term weaknesses. Queen to h6, rook to c8, unpinning the knight. Now knight takes e5 as a threat. Kramnik starts with bishop g5, attacking the queen. Has to go to f7. And now he gets rid of the knight before it could take on e5 or jump to c5 and e4. Queen d7, and the situation has stabilized a little bit. We have opposite colored bishops, which once again is not a drawish thing but favors the attacker. And this position, white should be better because his initiative on the dark squares around the black king is more serious than any potential black initiative against the point g2, because white hasn't gone g3 and weakened his light square, so he can always go f3 if he really has to make this bishop a little less potent. Still, Of course, nothing is decided yet, but this position is not pleasant because there's permanent checkmates on g7 to take care of. White has the plan of h4 and h5 to keep his initiative going. So Topalov has to be careful. Queen f7, covering g6. b3, not sure this was necessary, but it's useful to stop rook c4 and also to just make sure the a2 pawn is never en prise, or the b2 pawn. Queen to f8. He's annoyed by this permanent threat of queen g7 checkmate, so the queen gets kicked out of h6. Note that white should by no means even consider trading queens here, because without queens he doesn't have any initiative left on the king side and the position would just be equal and fine for black. So he goes queen f4, Topalov goes rook c2, tries to occupy the open c file, but Kramnik is not worried about that file. Instead he's worried about the black king, starts going h4, plan I've mentioned to go h5 and soften up these defenses a little bit. Rook ac8, h5. You can't really take that guy because after gh, queen g5, white sort of wins. Not sort of, he does win actually. Not sure how relevant this line is, but I'll show it anyway because it's cute. Rook takes d5, key move here, getting rid of this powerful defender on d5 and dragging the king into the great wide open. Rook e1 check, there's no defense. King d7, queen f5 check. And black loses because his king can't go to the c file since c2 would be en prise. So he can't take on h5, and of course he doesn't. He goes queen to e8 instead, preparing to recapture on g6 with a queen, when all of a sudden black would have some threats of his own against g2. But Kramnik has one more reinforcement to throw into the game. Goes rook to d3, very powerful rook lift, planning to put this rook on g3 and threatening hg6 when queen g6 runs into rook g3. And while hg6 would be very well met with rook to h3. So Topalov stops this rook's activity. On the third rank goes rook 2 to c3. Maybe rook 8 c3 was a better chance. Then if rook a d1 is in the game, white keeps an edge, but maybe the rook on f7 was more on c2, sorry. c2 was more important than on c8. Still, the status quo would remain unchanged. Black's position would not be nice. Say he goes rook 2 to c3, rook a d1. Of course, his brother helps his colleague on d3, brother, colleague, whatever. You get the idea. And it's very bad for black not to take, because once again he would face the same problems but no longer have the defense of his own rook covering the c3 file. So Topalov has to do something else, and he went gh5, which looks like a good idea now that rook g3 is not possible, preparing queen to g6, but turns out it is actually the losing mistake. He had to wait passively with an unpleasant position, let's say rook c7, but no imminent breakthrough for white, and Kramnik would still have had to come up with a plan to crash through. Set gh5 was played, which would work in almost all lines, but there is one move that pretty much decides the game here. Rook takes d5, once again eliminating this key defender. E takes d5 and e6, unleashing the bishop while threatening all kinds of unpleasantness. Mainly just rook takes d5, and the small white army is too much for the black king to deal with. One big factor is that you can't take on e6 because of check, check. And bishop takes c3 and the queen from g7 defends the bishop, so white will just be a piece up. Therefore, Topalov tries to organize his defenses, retreats the rook to the 7th rank to at least guard all kinds of mates on the 7th. But Kramnik just follows through with rook takes d5, activates his last piece, and he has a pretty straightforward plan of rook takes f5 followed by rook g5 check, winning. Topalov tries to eliminate this very unpleasant pawn on e6. Goes queen takes e6, but that loses sight of the g6 square. So Kramnik can now go queen g5 check. There's no longer queen g6 in reply. King to f8 and rook takes f5. And we see all the white pieces operating at maximum capacity, so black's nominal material advantage does not play a role here. There's just no defense. For example, rook c5, trying to exchange this very unpleasant rook, runs into a nice little line, bishop e7 check, double check, king e8, only legal move, rook f8 check, king d7, bishop takes c5, rook takes c5, and there's multiple ways to win the queen. Quick is queen d8 check, king c6, and rook to f6. Winning by pinning. So you can't do that. Instead, Topalov tries to unpin on this 7th rank, goes rook to f7. Unpin is not the right word, right? But yeah, to guard his king with rook f7. That doesn't work either, because now white wins the queen in a different manner. Queen h6 check, king e8, rook to e5, the next pin. And it's pretty much game over. Topalov tries the very last trick, rook to c6, hoping for rook e6, when now all the pins work in black's favor. He would pick up the bishop on f6 and be alright. But white continues the pinning game, goes queen h5, and uses the fact that neither the rook nor the queen can take on f6 because of legal issues. Therefore, next move is rook takes e6, followed by bishop somewhere, and white would just remain with the bishop and the queen against the two rooks, which is a piece up and a decisive advantage. Therefore, Topalov resigned. And that victory on the top board also meant that the team from Siberia, the number 2 seed, defeated the top seed, Sokar Azerbaijan, with 3.5, 2.5, and is now very well positioned to win the European Club Cup. Congratulations to Vladmir Kramnik. Good game by him. I'm not sure where it went wrong for Topalov. A couple of moments one could point to. The first, well, this would need more evidence, but I am a little suspicious of this move f5. It just feels too weakening to me. And similar thing could be said about the move. A couple moves later, after queen to h5, the move g6, when these dark squares really are a long-term problem. And then later, it's all the pawn moves. This pawn did a lot of damage. First it went g6, and after rook 81 it took on h5, which was the decisive mistake, allowing this nice finish by Kramnik with rook d5, ed and e6. So that was our game of the day from the European Club Cup in Skopje. I'll see you guys on Chess 24, where of course we are showing the last rounds live. Thank you for your attention and see you next time. Bye bye.